Masechet Gittin, Daf He. We're still talking about the Mishnah that says if a messenger comes from overseas to Israel, he needs to say Befanai nichtab ubefanai nechtam. We saw that there are two reasons given. Rabbah says because overseas they don't know the law that has to be written lishma. And Rava says it's because we want to authenticate the signatures, and since they're overseas, it will be hard to find the witnesses should the signatures ever be questioned, and therefore the messenger says, I saw they were written in front of me, and that is a kind of notary or authentication of the witnesses. We noted at the end of the last daf that, in fact, Rabbah agrees with Rava. Rabbah requires this formula for both reasons. Okay, now we're going to, on Amud Aleph today, we're going to have three challenges against Rabbah. Here's the first. Tanan. Hamebi get min medinat hayam ve'no yachol lomar befanai nichtab befanai nechtam im yesh alav aidim yitkayem behotamav. The Mishnah later on says that someone that brings a get from overseas and he cannot say this formula, we'll see in a second why he can't say it. If there are witnesses on the get, then it can be ratified the way normally contracts are ratified. They'll validate it in front of a bet din, and people will say, "Yes, we see. We recognize these signatures. That this is the signatures of these two people." So, in other words, if you don't have the formula, you can use ratification of the signatures instead. Havinan ba. Now, when we analyze this Mishnah, this is all part of the setup to the question. Mai eno yachol lomar. What does it mean he can't say it? If you say it's because he's a deaf mute, he can't speak, and that's why he can't say it. Wait a second, but in that case, he wouldn't be able to be a messenger in the first place. Because another Mishnah says anyone can be an agent except a deaf mute, someone who is not mentally competent, and a minor, and so therefore it couldn't be that. V'amarav Yosef hachamaiskinan kigon shenetanola keshehu pikeach v'lo yispik lomad befanai nichtab befanai nichtam ad shenitharesh. Rav Yosef explained the Mishnah that's talking about a case where the husband gave it to him and declared him to be a messenger when he had all of his senses with him and he was able to hear and speak. But then on the way, I don't know, something happened, some kind of injury, and then he became a deaf mute, and so he wasn't able to say. So that's why he had competence at the beginning and was able to be a messenger, but then lost the ability just to speak by the time he got there, and that's why he couldn't say it. All right, all that is the case, and now here's the question. According to Rav, it's going to be important why we had to clarify exactly what the case is, because it's a very unusual case. How often does that happen, that someone, he can, starts his journey and he's totally fine, and then in the middle it becomes a mute on the journey. Okay, so according to Rava, this makes sense. Rava said the whole purpose of the messenger saying the formula is because we're afraid that the husband or someone will question the signatures, and this is a way of ratifying these signatures on the document. However, if you actually have two witnesses that ratify the signatures, then certainly you don't need the formula for the 100% ratification that you usually do is certainly much better even than one messenger saying that I saw it signed in front of me. So that's totally fine for Rabbah. But according to Rabbah, who actually requires both reasons, and one of his reasons is that it has to be lishma. So therefore, two witnesses coming and saying, we ratify these signatures, that doesn't help, because it doesn't help us know that it was written by the scribe with this particular woman in mind. So how is Rabbah going to explain? This Mishnah is talking about a case after the people in other countries learned this law that it has to be lishma, right? Eventually, after so many years of the people in Israel, insisting, make sure to say this formula, and probably sending them letters and teaching them, hey, make sure you say it lishma. And most of the scribes did know. Eventually, everybody learned this law, and even in other countries. And that's why there's no need to say the formula anymore. All right, ihachi yachol nameh. If so, why does the Mishnah bother mentioning a case of a person that cannot speak, even if he can speak? A perfectly healthy person also should not have to say the formula if there are witnesses to ratify the signatures, right? There's no need for the formula for anyone to say it. And the answer is we're worried that maybe the situation will go back to the bad old days, and the scribes out there in overseas will forget or ignore this law, and so since we're afraid it's going to go back, so therefore let's keep up the Gezerot. Let's make the messenger still say the formula just in case it goes back to the original situation. Ihachi, we say, eno yachol nameh. Well, if you want to keep up the Gezerot just in case, then someone who cannot speak also, you should say, has to say it. It's not good enough excuse that he can't speak, right? Because you were making a gezerah and said that's it. So everyone should have to do it across the board. And having two witnesses to ratify, that's good for the ratification of the signatures, but it's not going to help us lishma. And even though everybody out overseas is doing it lishma, but it might go back to the original. So you're requiring everybody else to say the formula. You have to require the cheresh also to say the formula. And the answer to that is Pikar v'nitchadesh milata de la shechicha milata de la shechicha la gezur barabanan. No, someone who was healthy and then became a deaf mute on the way. That's an unusual circumstance, and the rabbis aren't going to come and make a gezerah, especially if the gezerah in this case is only bit that might go back to the original case. So they're not going to make a gezerah on an unusual case, only on the usual case of a healthy person that's bringing it, and he's healthy the whole time. Now we ask about that. I have another case that's unusual. That would be the wife herself being a messenger. Why would a wife be a messenger? Well, for some reason, the husband and the wife are overseas, and they want the get to be actually given in front of a bet din, let's say in Yerushalayim. They like that bet din. They want it to be recorded there. So the husband's not coming. The husband gives the get to the wife as a shaliach, and says, here, take this as a shaliach on my behalf, and take it to Yerushalayim, and give it to yourself in Yerushalayim in front of the Bet Din there. So she can do that now, but it is unusual, unusual case. Nevertheless, we say, so yet the Mishnah teaches that if a woman herself brings her get from a different place, it's okay. She can be a shaliach as long as she says. So why would she be required to say the formula if it's in an unusual case? You just said that we don't make a gezerah in an unusual case. And the answer is shelo tachlok b'shlichut. We don't want to distinguish between different types of agents. And so, even though a woman is not is unusual, nevertheless, nevertheless, we don't want to say, okay, a woman doesn't have to, but a man does. If he's a shaliach, so therefore we say, you know what? Let's make it across the board and make everybody. Anyone who brings it, make them a shaliach. Now we ask, Ihachi ba'al nameh ala Matanyahu atzmo shehevi gito en tzarich lomar befanai nichtav ufanai nichtam. Wait a second, I have another case that where it's not required. And if you say I'm going to require it across the board, what about the husband himself? Right? If husband himself brings a get, here he's not actually a shaliach. He doesn't have to appoint himself a shaliach because he's actually bringing it. But nevertheless, it's similar to a shaliach case, and you just said you don't want to make any distinction across the board. So how come when a husband brings his own get from a different place, he does not have to say the formula? Why don't we require it to make it across the board? And so we answer, Tama ma'imur abanat tzarich lomar fanai nichtav dilma ate ba'al me'arer pasil le hashta min kat naket le bide ve'aru'e ka me'arer aler. Oh, this doesn't make sense to require the husband. What's the whole point of the gezerah of the rabbis to say the formula in the first place? Is because we're afraid that the husband will come and contest the validity of the get. He can contest it by asking about the signatories, but he can also contest it, right, for Ravaz, according to Rabbah, and he can say that this get was never written lishma. So that's why we want the messenger to say this formula. But now, if the husband himself is bringing it, so he wouldn't bring it and then contest it. If he was against it, then he wouldn't have brought it in the first place. And so there's no need to worry that he's going to contest it later if he's bringing it in the first place. So that's why there's no need to make the gezerah at all for a husband bringing it. But there is a reason to make the gezerah for other people bringing it, even in an unusual case where the wife is bringing it herself. Now, we still have to explain why, in the unusual case of a wife bringing it for herself, then she does have to say the declaration, whereas unusual case of someone who becomes deaf-mute on the way does not, because that's, we said it's unusual, and so you don't make a gezerah in an unusual situation. It seems there is a distinction between those two, in that the wife can say it, so therefore we want to say lo plug and make everybody say it, whereas the person who becomes mute physically cannot say it. So there's no way we can say, listen, lo plug, just say it anyway. Physically impossible. And we don't worry about it too much because it's an unusual case. All right, the case of a woman bringing it for herself, it's not like when she gets there, she actually hands it to herself. The idea is that the husband says, listen, take this. It will take this get, and it will become effective when you get to that betin. So that she, on the way there, she is a shaliach, and then when she gets there, she has it in her hands, and so then in front of the betin there, that's when it actually becomes effective. All right, good. So that concludes the first line of questioning. Second question, challenge to Rabbah. Tashema. Debe'amine Shemuel merav Huna. Shenaim sheviu get medinat hayam. Tzrichin she'emiru befanenu nichtab, befanenu nichtam, or en tzrichin. Shemuel asked Rav Huna. It's unusual because Shemuel is a first generation Amora, and Rav Huna is second generation. Usually Rav Huna is a student of Shemuel and quotes things in his name. So maybe this is a different Shemuel. I'm not sure. So he says two people that bring a get from overseas. They have to say it was written and signed in front of us. They also have to. Do they have to say the formula, or do they not need to say the formula because there's two messengers? And Rav Huna answered, Amar le en tzrichin uma ilu yomedu befanenu gersha mila mehemne. So they don't have to say it because let's say you had two people that came and said, we saw him divorce her in front of us. We saw the husband give her a get. Would they not be believed? They would be believed. And so therefore, this should be the same thing, right? They wouldn't have to say any extra formula if they actually said that we saw it happen. So therefore, they should not have to say any extra formula here, either when they are themselves bringing the get. So that was his answer. So now let's analyze that. According to Rava, this makes sense. Since there are two witnesses here, so the two witnesses, they are the same as people that two people that can ratify the signatures, and that's why there's no need to say the formula. However, according to Rabbah, we would still have a problem because they're not saying anything about the way that the get was written, and so the get could have been written not lishma, and so this they should be required to still say the formula, even if it's two people. And the answer, like above, is this question and answer here was talking about after the people overseas, the scribes, all learned the law that you have to be lishma, and that's why they're not worried about lishma anymore. If so, then even one person should not be required to say the formula. How come over here it says only if it's two messengers you don't say the formula? If there's no need, if everybody knows lishma, there's no need to say the formula at all. And the answer is oh, we're worried that it's going to go back to the way it was originally. Seems from here, by the way, that Rabbah has only one reason, right? He's in this line of reasoning. We're not assuming that Rabbah agrees with Rava, because if so, even if there's only one, then one messenger is not good for ratification. So you'd still need to say if there's only one, right? So that would answer that question. If it's if they already learned that they already learned the law of lishma, so that's why one would still need to say it in order to ratify the document. Okay. Anyway, so one also. Okay, no worry, that's going to go back to the way it was, and they're going to forget the law of lishma. If you're worried that they're going to go back and forget the law of lishma, then even if there's two messengers Also, you should require that they say the formula, because just in case, it goes back to the problem originally. As before, but here in a different application, bringing a messenger, appointing two people to be a messenger. Why would you go through the extra trouble of having two messengers if one messenger is enough? So it's unusual to have two messengers, and therefore the rabbis are not going to make a gezerah to require it when there's two messengers. But a woman herself, the wife herself, being a messenger, why would you require it there? And the Mishnah does require, if she brings it herself, she has to say the formula, and that's an unusual case. Because we don't want to make a distinction between one type of agent and another type of agent, and so we say you're right. Even though a woman bringing it is unusual, nevertheless we're going to require it so that it will be required across the board. Now here again, we have to make a distinction between this case of one woman where we say don't make a distinction and require it, whereas when two messengers bring it, then the rabbis did not require saying the formula. Though both unusual cases, what's the difference between the two? It seems that when there's one messenger, then it's easy to confuse what type of messenger it is, and if you require it if you don't require it of a woman who's a messenger, then you can say, I guess you don't need it for a man either, because people will not distinguish between those cases. So we say any type of messenger, you have to send it. That's if it's one messenger. But two messengers, that's significantly different, and people will not assume that if two messengers don't have to say it, then one messenger also doesn't have to say it. People say, that was two messengers. It's probably not the same as the case of one messenger. So it has to do with how similar and how confusing cases can become. Now we ask, if you're going to require it across the board for any one witness, no matter who it is, and what about the husband himself if he happens to be bringing it from far away? The husband does not have to say it was written for me. Why not? Why not? We're not sure. How do we know how it was written? If it was written lishma, what if someone comes and questions it? Who are we worried about questioning it? The husband himself. You have to say this so that the husband can't come later and say, it was not written for her sake. Now the husband himself is bringing it, so surely he's not going to then contest it. And so that's why we don't have to worry ever about the husband having to say this formula. Third and last question in the series against Rabbah. Tashema. Hamebi get mimidinat hayam untano la velo amar la befanai nichtam im nitkayem bechotamav kasher vim lav pasul. Tosefta here says that if someone brings a get as a messenger from overseas, and he gives it to the woman, but he did not say the formula, well, if you're able to ratify the signatures, then it's still a valid get. But if you cannot ratify the signatures, it's no good. And the Tosefta continues and says, "Have lo husrichu lomar befanai nichtam lachmir aleha ela lehakel aleha." And this law shows us that the rabbis only required this to say this formula, did not require it as a stringency, as an extra requirement, but rather as a leniency. In other words, the formula can replace the ratification. Ratification can be a difficult process. You need two people who either the signatories themselves or who know the signatories and know their signatures, and that might be hard to find. So the rabbis wanted to be lenient and say, you know what? I know it's hard because sometimes you're traveling and you don't know how you can't find those such witnesses. So therefore the rabbis were lenient and say, here's another way, an easier way. Let the messenger say this formula, and that's sufficient. But all this was a leniency, and if you have ratification, then certainly that's even better. Okay, that's the statement. Now, this makes sense according to Rava, if the whole purpose of saying the formula is in fact instead of ratification, then that's why if you have ratification, you don't need the formula. But according to Rabban, who needs to say lishma, So ratifying the signatures does not help us know that it was written lishma. And the answer is hachab b'maiskinan lachar shelamdu. Once again, here we're talking about a case where they already overseas, they learned the law, and that's why we're not worried about lishma. Okay, v'hamad gezerah shema yachzor dabal kilkolo. All right, we know this drill. We already saw in the two previous cases that we still require the testimony, require the formula, because we might go back to the bad old days when people overseas were not proficient in the law of lishma. And we answer kisheniset. This tosefta here, when it says that it's kasher, that's only b'di avad if the woman already got married. In that case, we don't want to undo the marriage and make her separate from her next husband. And certainly if they have kids, we don't want to declare those kids to be mamzerim. So that's the case where we say, listen, if you have ratification, even though the messenger did not say the formula, then you know what? We'll validate the get because you're already married. But if you're not already married, then we're going to withdraw and say, you know what? Don't get married based on this get. Okay, so that's why we're lenient here. The rabbis don't want to have a gezerah that's going to ruin someone's marriage if they're already married. Wait a second. If it's talking about a case where she was already married, then you should not have the continuation, the last part of the Tosefta, that says this shows us that the formula is not to be machmir, but rather is a leniency. No, we're not making this formula is not helping her out. The reason why we're lenient in this case is because she was already married, and we don't want to break up her marriage. All right, that's the reason. So the continuation of Tosefta doesn't make sense. In fact, this is a stringency, because if she's not married yet, even if she can ratify the document with witnesses, we still tell her, oh wait, the messenger didn't say the formula, don't get married. Well, that's an extra stringency, not a leniency. If in fact we're going to nullify the document when she is not yet married and only say it's kosher because she's already married, right? So this formula would not make sense. But we can explain it. It's saying like this. We can go back to the original formula here, right? If someone brings a get and did not say the formula, if you ratified it with signatures, okay, because she's already married. But if not, it's no good. And if you'll ask yourself, wait a second, if someone didn't say the formula, then we should make her divorce, separate, right? Leave her the second husband. It's an invalid marriage. Why don't we do that? Oh, because this whole thing is not to be stringent, but only to be lenient in a case where she's already married, right? So but that leniency will only apply if she's already married, because we don't want to break up that second marriage. But if she's not married yet, then in fact you're right, it's not a leniency, so we can still fit that in. And what's the reason why the rabbis required this formula at all in the first place? Because we're worried that the husband will come and contest and say, oh, this is an invalid get. So that's why we want to have this formula said by the messenger up front, so that we don't have any problems later. Now, in this case, if she's already married and the husband did not come and contest, should we, the court, come and cause her problems because we're worried that in the future he will contest it? I mean, the worst case scenario is that the husband comes and contests it and we're not able to ratify it, and then she has to separate. So should we preempt the husband and make her separate now when she's already married? That wouldn't make sense at all, right? But it only makes sense to require it before she actually gets remarried, so that she doesn't get herself into a bad situation that will be bad for her, and therefore we're going to require it up front. And if the messenger doesn't say it, then we're going to go say, go back and find out, and let's ratify it. And don't get married until you have been able to ratify the document. So it makes sense to require her to do it before she gets married, but it makes no sense to require her to say that the get is invalid after she was already married. That goes against the entire reasoning why the rabbis required it in the first place. Next, we're going to try to line up the machloket between Rabbah and Rava, who are both from Bavel, with a couple of other Amoraim, and these are from Eretz Yisrael. Biflugta de Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. It seems that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who are early Amoraim from Eretz Yisrael, are also arguing along the same lines as Rabbah and Rava. One of them, but we don't know which one is which, says that the reason why the messenger has to say "B'fanai nichtam" is because in Eretz Yisrael, in overseas, they are not careful. They don't know the law that it has to be written for her sake. And the other says because when you're traveling, then the witnesses will not be around to ratify it, and therefore the messenger, by saying that, says, I was there, and he can ratify the signatures. So we know that they each one said one of these opinions, but we don't know which one said which. So remember, it is Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Whichever one of them said, the other one will say the other. So we can prove Tistayem de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who Da'amar lefi she'en beki'in lishma, must be Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. He's the one that says it's because they don't know it has to be written for her sake overseas. To Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, Aite Gita lekamed Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi ve'amar le because we have a story of this Rabbi Shimon bar Abba. He brought a get to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and asked him regarding this get, right? Someone brought it. I brought it. And do I have to say the formula or not? And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, Amar le la sirichat, lo amru ela bedorot harishonim, shen bikin lishma, val bedorot achronim, te bikin lishma lo. He says, no, you don't need to, because this was an early law, they said in early generations, because they didn't know about it everywhere. But now, in the later generations, where everybody knows this law, interesting, now we can better time when they learned the law. Because this is already an early Amoraic generation in Eretz Yisrael. He says they already now know the law, so now you don't have to anymore. Tistayem. So we can conclude that the original reason for requiring the formula is because of lishma, and it sounds like only because of lishma, not for any other reason. And that was the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. According to that, it would be Rabbi Yochanan. He's the one that says it's because we need to ratify the signature. So remember that. This is going to come up in a question later. Now, v'tiz bera, hold on. I have a question about the story. Wait a second. How could Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say that you don't have to say the formula because now everybody knows lishma? First of all, we said before that even Rabbah agrees with the reasoning of Rava, and so therefore it would make sense that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, even though he says we have to require the formula for lishma, would say we also need to require the formula because of ratification. That is a valid reason, a good reason to require it. And so even if everybody knows that it's lishma, still you should require to say the formula so that you can ratify the witnesses. And furthermore, we saw before it said that the matter will go back to the bad old days, so we should continue the Gezerah just in case they stop being careful to write everything lishma. So how could Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say that? Ela Rabbi Shimon bar Abba inish acharin hava behadeh v'hadeh lakashib lehem mishum kevodod Rabbi Shimon. Must be in that original story. Rabbi Shimon bar Abba came. He was not alone. He actually came with another person. There were two messengers. And now, why didn't it mention that there's another messenger, if that's an essential part of the story? Because of the honor of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is a great sage. The other guy was just some Amaretz, and it wouldn't be respectful to mention them to mention them together in one breath, as if they're on the same level. And that's why I didn't mention it. But in fact, there was another person. Since there was another person there, two people are sufficient to ratify the document, and therefore you would not have to say the formula at all, not for the reason of ratification, and also not for the reason of lishma, and also you don't have to worry about the going back to the way it was in the beginning, because we said we don't make that gezerah in a rare case, and a rare case is two people bringing it together, and will not be confused with one person bringing it, as we said on Amud Aleph. Good. So now we know who says what. That Rabbi Yochanan would be the one that says we need to say the formula for ratification of the witnesses, of the signatures. Itmar bifne kama notno la. So now we bring another really important question. Before how many people does a messenger need to give the get to her? Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Chanina. Chad amar bifnei shnayim v'chad amar bifnei shelosha. This is a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan, who was also a participant just above, and Rabbi Chanina, now a new person. One of them says in front of two people, one of them says of three. Now, what's the difference between 2 and 3? The answer is not just 1, but rather 2 and 3 are fundamentally different. 2 serve as witnesses. 3 serve as bet din. So do you need witnesses or bet din? In order to get married, to do kiddushin, you need 2 witnesses. You don't need a bet din in order to get married. So here, for the messenger to hand off the get to the wife, what do we need? 2 or 3. So we're going to prove, we know Rabbi Yochanan, one of them says 2, one of them says 3, but we don't know which is which. And so now we're going to prove that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says 2 witnesses. Because here's a story. The Rabin bar Rav Chisda, I take it telekamed Rabbi Yochanan, v'amar le zil hav la be'apeh tereh, ve'emar lehu befanai nichtav v'fanai nichtam. Tistayem, we have an actual story of Rabin bar Rava that brought a get in front of Rabbi Yochanan. And he said, what should I do with this get? I brought this get. And he says, here's what you should do. Take it and give it to her in front of 2 people and say the formula. So Rabbi Yochanan explicitly says 2 people. Good. Now, what is at the essence of the machloket between whether it's 2 or 3? Why would you need either a bet din or not? Lema b'hakami palge demanta amar b'fnei shenayim kasaba lefi she'en biki'in lishma umanda amar b'fnei shelosha kasaba lefi she'en aidim mesuyin lekayemo. It would make sense that this machloket of 2 or 3 follows along the same lines as the 2 reasons where we've been discussing all along. The one that says 2 is because they don't know that it's lishma. They're not always careful to write it lishma. So we need testimony. That's what we need. Testimony that the scribe wrote it with her in mind. And that's why you have to give it in front of 2, so that 2 people, right, the messenger will say in front of 2, who therefore can testify for the future and certify that the messenger was there. And so therefore, that's a good likelihood that he wrote it for the messenger, standing there. The messenger can even say, I saw that happened. And so that's why you need 2. All you need is testimony, just to know that, to certify that it's lishma. However, if the one that says 3, that means that we're worried that witnesses will not be able to ratify it. Now, in order to ratify a document, this is a law throughout all ratification of all contracts everywhere. In Mishnah Sanhedrin, it talks about how many judges you need for various things. And there it says that anytime you want to ratify a signatures of a document, you need 3 people. Therefore, if the reason why the messenger has to say the formula is in order to ratify the signatures, well, ratification would have to be in front of 3, and so that would make sense. One who says 2 says lishma, and one who says 3 would say enedim misrim l'kayimo. You see, we're going to have a problem here because we just established that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that said you need 2 witnesses, and that would line up with the lefi she'en beki'in lishma, with the lishma reason. But in the sugya right before, we said that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says must be by process of elimination. He must be the one that says en edim misyun lekayemo. So now we're going to have a problem of it for Rabbi Yochanan. The Tizbera ben Yoshua ben Levi amar lefi she'en beki'in lishma. Rabbi Yochanan amar lefi she'en edim misyun lekayemo. And so now here we have this question we saw from the sugya before, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, he's the one that gives the lishma reason, and by process of elimination, that means Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says, because we want to ratify the document. But if it's because to ratify the document, then you should need 3 witnesses. And here Rabbi Yochanan says you only need 2. So we have a contradiction about in terms of what Rabbi Yochanan thinks, and another question. Ve'od ha'amar Rabbah it le Rava, and we said that Rabbah agrees with the opinion of Rava, and therefore, even according to the opinion that says has to be lishma, and yeah, you're right, for that reason you'd only need 2 witnesses, still has to agree with the reasoning of Rava that you have to ratify the document, and that would require 3 people there to be a bet din. So really everybody should require 3 to be a bet din. So how are we going to resolve this? Ela dekula ama ba'inan aidim esuyin lekayemo. Rather, everybody agrees that yes, you would need witnesses in order to ratify the document, and the messenger would have to say this formula in order to ratify the document. In other words, everybody agrees with the opinion of Rava that certainly you need to ratify it. And now, and so since you have to ratify, you actually need 3 people. You need a bet din. But here's what the machloket between 2 or 3 is not dependent on which reason you say Rabbah or Rava, but rather on a different question altogether. V'acha b'shalich na'aseh ayed, v'ayed na'aseh dayan kami palgeh. Man da'amar b'fnei shenayim kasabar shel shaliach na'aseh ayed, v'ayed na'aseh dayan. Man da'amar b'fnei shelosha kasabar shaliach na'aseh ayed, v'en ayed na'aseh dayan. They're arguing about whether the messenger can also act as a witness, and further, whether a witness can act as a judge. He can play both roles, all 3 roles. So the one who says all you need is 2, that was Rabbi Yochanan in the story, said all you need is 2. So Rabbi Yochanan says here that yes, the main reason is because you have to uphold the ratify the documents, as he said in the previous sugya against Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So now everything is consistent. Rabbi Yochanan thinks that. And nevertheless, he only requires 2 people to be there because the messenger himself can count as another one. So he says, yes, the shaliach himself can count as a witness, and he can also count as a judge, and therefore you have 3 judges, the 2 people that he's giving the get in front of, and the messenger himself. Umanda, and the other opinion there, which was Rabbi Chanina, would say, right here, that's Rabbi Chanina. He says no, that a shaliach can be a witness, but a witness cannot be a judge, and that's why you need 3 people besides the messenger. We ask, wait, I thought everybody agrees that if it's a Darabanan law, then certainly a witness can also be a judge, and this whole thing is a Darabanan law to require this formula. To have to and to want to ratify it, to have to pre-certify the ratification just in case the husband comes, is all Rabbanan, and so therefore everyone should agree that the messenger can serve as a dayan, and so you only have to give it in front of 2. So we'll try again. Rather, Rabbi Chanina, he says you need 3 other men to give the get in front of, because sometimes a woman, is permitted, is valid to be a messenger, and so therefore sometimes a woman will be the messenger, and people will get confused, and they'll think that when there's one man is a messenger, so all we need is 2 people to give the get, for him to give the wife the get. So too, if a woman is a messenger, so it should be the same law. The woman messenger will give it to the wife in front of 2 people, and they won't realize that the only reason why it's allowed to give it in front of 2 people is because we're counting the messenger as a 3rd judge, but a woman cannot be a judge. and therefore we don't want any confusion. So that's why Rabbi Chanina says, you know what, you should always require 3 judges, even when there is in fact a messenger that technically you could count, but it will get confusing. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says we don't have to make a gezerah. We know that a woman cannot be a judge, and we know that we need 3 people that can be judges, and therefore, if a man is a messenger, then we know, oh, the man, you're a messenger, come also be a judge. If a woman is a messenger, then we'll know, oh, we have to get 3 people to get a judge, and that's actually what they're arguing about, and that solves all the problems. Tanya kevated Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi get ממדינתיה מותנו לה, לא אמר לה בפני נכתב ובפני נחתם, יוסי והוולד ממזר דברי רבי מאיר. חכמים אומרים אין הוולד ממזר. כסד יעשה, יתלנו המנה, ויחזור ויתננו לה בפני שניים, ויאמר בפני נכתב ובפני נחתם. So we're going to see a baraita in support of Rabbi Yochanan that says 2 people are sufficient, that the messenger can give the get to the wife in front of 2 people, from this context where it says someone who brings a get from overseas and he does not say the formula. So then, according to the Rabbi Meir, if she gets remarried and has a child in the second marriage, she has to leave that second husband and the child that she has with him as mamzer, because she was never divorced from the first husband. So the Rabbi Meir is very harsh. Chachamim, however, says, no, the child is not a mamzer. So what should he do? What should we do to rectify the situation? So she should take back the get. He should take back the get and give it to her again. The messenger can take back the get and give it to her again and say the formula. There's a big machloket among the Mishanim. How much will that help? Will it help only for the future? And that if now she can then go marry someone, or will it already help regarding the marriage that she already had? And allow her to stay married to that person. Okay. Anyway, the point for us is that when it says the messenger should take it back and give it to her again in front of 2, you see proof positive that all you need is 2 people. Good. Now, and now, since we brought up this whole source, according to the Rabbi Meir in this baraita, just because the messenger didn't say the formula, you're going to say that she has to separate and the child is a mamzer, the whole requirement of the formula is only midrabanan. So why are you going to make it the invalid midoraita? And so and even cause mamzer. It says yes. In fact, we do according to Rabbi Meir in Rabbi Meir l'tamed Amar Rav Hamnuna mishmei de'ula. אומר היה רבי מאיר כל המשנה ממטבע שטבעו חכמים בגיטין יוסיף והוולד ממזר. We know that this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir in general, that anyone who changes the coin matbea in just like in English you say to coin a phrase, so too this has that double usage in Hebrew. Matbea is a coin, but it also means a formula, maybe because a coin you stamp every coin with the same exact stamp and they all come out the same. So once you have a fixed formula that the rabbis say regarding a get, and again the rabbis say, listen, here's the formula you have to use for a get, and when you give it you have to say these words. Even though the requirement is the Rabbanan, once the rabbis require it, it becomes part of the set procedure. And if you change from that set formula, then you have to separate, and in fact, the child will be a mamzer. In other words, the rabbis actually can define what how a deoraita get must be done, and therefore have the power to even create a mamzer if you don't follow that. Okay, good. Now, one last question here. Bar Hedya, Ba'ela Tuya Gita. Bar Hedya is famous from has a dream interpreter. Whole story about him in the Berachot. Okay, but here he wanted to bring a get. He was going to be a messenger. So he came to Rabbi Achai, who was the expert appointed over Gittin, to ask him what to do. He says, oh, you're going to be a messenger? Listen, go to the scribe's house when he's writing it, and I want you to stand above him and watch every single letter to make sure he is writing it properly, he's writing it with her in mind. Okay. Now, by the Hedya comes to the Bi Amer Baseh, and he asks the same question. And they say, no, you don't have to. You have to be present, see in general, but you don't have to overlook every letter. Now, now, if you say, you know what, just be stringent and follow Rabbi Achai. But there's a problem with being stringent, because every stringency has a leniency and the other way around too. Because if you say, you know what, let's be stringent and require, yes, every messenger has to look at every letter, well, now you're just bringing this new stringency that only you say and other people don't say it. And now you're going to cast aspersions on all Gittin, prior Gittin, that where the messenger didn't look over every single letter. You say, oh, that's required? Wait a second, the last 100 cases, the messenger didn't do that, and now you can say that's no good, and all those women now got married and had children and grandchildren, and you're going to cause a big mess. So, it's nice to be machmir, but not in a case like this where it's going to cause many difficulties. So, okay. Rabba bar Rav Hana. So now a similar story. Rabbi Chana, he brought a get, and half was written in his presence, and then, he got called out, and the other half, the scribe wrote it, not in his presence. And so now it's half yes, half no. What's the law? So the answer to Rabbi Elazar, he says, even if the scribe wrote one line of it, lishma, in the presence of the messenger, and you saw it, so then we can assume the rest of it is good also. And there's no problem. You don't have to do anything again. It's a valid get. Rav Ashi Amar, afilu kan kol musa vekan megiltas. Even if the messenger heard the sound of the quill, the sound of the scroll, even if he didn't actually see the scribe writing, but he heard the rustling of it, and he heard the ink being mixed around or dipped in, and so he knows that the scribe was writing. He doesn't have to actually see it. He knows the scribe is writing it, and he knows that the scribe is writing it for him to take. So that's lishma. Good. Tanya kivated Rav Ashi, and we have a braita that supports this lenient opinion of Rav Ashi, because it says, "Hamavi get midat hayam, afilu hu babayit v'sofer ba'aliyah, hu ba'aliyah v'sofer babayit, afilu nichnas v'yoseh kol hayom kulo kasher." If someone's bringing a get from overseas, and he is the shaliach, even if when the scribe is writing, the messenger is in the house, and the scribe is on the second story of the house, and doesn't even see each other. Or the other way around, the messenger is upstairs, and the sofer is in the main part of the house. Even if he is going in and out all day long, coming in, coming out, all these cases, it's kosher. In other words, even if they're not in the same room, but as long as he's nearby, that's good enough. So the point is nearby. Nearby means he knows he can hear the scribe working, and he knows he's doing it, and that he's aware that the messenger is there and is going to take it. That's sufficient for us to establish that he's writing it for her sake. And here's the conclusion of the proof. If he's in the house and the scribe is upstairs, so the messenger is not actually seeing him. Rather, it must be that he at least hears the sound of the quill, the sound of the scroll. And so even though this baraita doesn't say explicitly about the sound, but we can imply it because he has to know something. Can't be in a house on the other side of town, but it has to be nearby in the same building. So that would be close enough that he could have awareness and hear that he knows that the scribe is working. Okay, let's just analyze this baraita a minute. The baraita ended, even if who's he, is going in and out all day long, it's still good. So if it's the messenger going in and out, wait, you just told me in the beginning of this baraita that even if they're not in the same room, but he's in the house and Sofer is upstairs, and he doesn't see him, that's okay. So all the more so if he's going in and out of the same room, and so half the time he sees him writing, and then he goes out for a break, and then he comes and sees him writing, all the more so that would be good, because then he's actually seeing him. Ela sofer, so what, is it the scribe? The scribe is going in and out? Peshita, that certainly would be good. Just because the scribe is taking a break and was going for a walk, we should say that's no good, right? Whenever he comes in, he's writing, and the messenger is there. The messenger actually sees everything that he's writing. So what if he takes a break? And the answer, the reason why the answer why that's a chidush, la sericha dinfak leshuka ve'ata. We're talking about the scribe, not just that he went out to for a breath of fresh air, but rather he went to the marketplace. When he's in the marketplace, everybody knows him, recognizes him. He says, "Oh, the scribe, listen, I need a divorce paper. I need to divorce my wife. Can you write me one?" He sees him in. He might hire him on the spot in the marketplace, and then when the scribe comes back, we could have been worried that maybe the scribe is going to set aside the get that he was working on in the middle, and now start writing a get for this person that is in that he was just hired for, that he met in the marketplace. And so since he's going out and coming in, I might have thought that maybe it's no good, because now he might have in mind a different person. Therefore, the Baraita says, even if he goes out and comes in, we don't worry about that. We assume that he just went out for a break and he's coming in and continuing to have in mind the same person that he was writing about before, and the messenger is there, and the messenger sees that, and therefore that is sufficient. So therefore, the bottom line here is that when we say the messenger has to know that befanai nichtav, it doesn't mean he has to be there over every single letter, although that was one opinion, but the concluding opinion here is that he doesn't have to oversee every letter. He just has to have general knowledge, intermittent, or even hearing and being in the same building, but knowing that the scribe is writing it for her sake, that is sufficient. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.